he knew better. Fear crimped off his flow and drove him to his knees. He propped a hand against the large boulder behind which he had sought privacy. The surface vibrated under his palm. He glanced to the lantern hanging from his leather waistband. The oil flame jiggered and snapped behind the pebbled glass. His chest tightened to a hard knot. Down the tunnel, the other prisoners hollered and screamed, accompanied by a rattle of chains as they tried to flee. But it was too late. Stone groaned with an ominous intensity, followed by a thunderous clap. The ground jolted up, throwing Rafe into the air. The boulder next to him bounced high, rebounded off the roof, and crashed to a floor now riven with cracks. Hey, what's up? It's Fairtrade ASMR, and today we are reading Chapter 4 of The Starless Crown by James Rollins. Chapter 4 is called The Rootless Statue, and this is part 2 of the story. I presume because it is following a new character. So, let us continue. Rafe landed hard on his rear and scuttled backward as the tunnel continued to collapse. His lantern, mercifully still intact, bobbed atop his knee breeches. Before him, a massive slab of roof broke free and smashed to rubble and dust. More fissures chased him down the tunnel, coursing across roof, walls, and floor. A choking black cloud rolled over him, heavy with sand and chalk. He coughed to keep from drowning in that silt. He hurriedly rolled to his feet and rushed away. The flickering flame at his thigh looked like a lone firelit lost, bouncing through a dark bower. Its light was too feeble to pierce the thick veil of dust. Still, he kept running, both his arms out. His ankle chains rang with each step, ching, ching, giving strident voice to his distress. In his haste to escape, his hip struck an outcropping. He spun, and glass shattered at his hip. A few pieces pierced his rough-spun breeches and sliced his leg. He winced and slowed, taking great care not to lose his lamp's flame. Only the overseer had a flint to reignite it if it should go out. That must not happen. He had witnessed other prisoners punished with darkness, poor souls lowered into pits without lanterns, sealed down there for days on end. They often came out frail, maddened creatures. It was Rafe's greatest fear, an eternal darkness without end. How could it not? He had lived all 3 decades in the Gold Gulls territories on the eastern edge of the Crown, at the fringe of the sun-blasted world, where night never fell and the lands were a sandy ruin, where heinous creatures made their home alongside tribes of savages who eked a meager, violent existence. Having lived all his life under Gold's sun, he held night to be no more than a rumor, a darkness to be feared. As he hobbled free of the worst of the dust cloud, he finally stopped. He unhooked his lantern and lifted it high. He took care in doing so, fearing too much jostling might knock the flame from its oiled taper. "Just stay where you are," he warned the pale flicker. As the dust thinned, he listened to the settling rock behind him. The pounding of his heart grew quieter too. He checked the passageway. The cave-in had stopped 100 steps away, completely collapsing the tunnel. A few stray rocks fell from the roof. A timber support had shattered with a loud pop, enough to make him jump back. Still, it looked like the worst was over. But what now? He sneezed loudly, "Choo!" startling himself, then turned and searched around him. He did not know this level of the mine, not that he hadn't heard stories. Earlier, roused from the piles of hay in the mine gull, he and a dozen others had been kicked and threatened with cudgels to this remote area of the chalk mine. There they had been lowered on hempen ropes, tied to an empty ore cart, winched down by the ox-driven windlass somewhere outside the pit mouth. It was said this section of the mine had been long abandoned. Some said its shafts and tunnels had dried out centuries ago, but most believed it was accursed, haunted by spirits, plagued by malicious ill-kilns. Rafe hadn't placed much stock in such tales. He knew some miners who snuck crusts of bread into crevices in the rocks, overseers who did the same with coins, mostly brass pinches, once even a silver eyrie, all to appease such spirits. Not him. He learned in the back of the alley of the anvil to trust only that which he could touch with his hands or see with his own eyes. He took no account of gods or stories of ghostlies or spookins. Living in Anvil, he learned there was plenty enough to be afraid of. What went bump in the night in Anvil was not some haunting, but someone trying to steal what was yours. Then again, he was often the one doing the bumping. Then again, Anvil was the territory's main port. It hunkered along the sea, a squalid pissil, if ever there was a place. It was a city of cutthroats and rogues of every ilk. It shat and sweated like a living creature, ripe with corruption, pestilence, and decay. By season, by storm, by fair weather, it never changed. Its bay was constantly festooned with the sails of 100 ships, its dockside a continual brawl. The saying went that no one lived in Anvil, they only survived in it. Raph sighed. How I miss it. Not that he held out any expectation of seeing it ever again. Betrayed by his own guild, he ended up being buried 100 leagues to the south, sentenced to spend the rest of his life in the mines. His offense? Crossing the wrong thief, the master of their guild. Lyra High March was her name. He thought it ill-fitting punishment for simply
stealing from the woman's former lover, the arch-sheriff of Anvil. The man was too tempting of a mark, and Lyra was not someone to prone to pinning, let alone loyalty. In fact, Rafe himself had shared the warmth of her bed many a time. He shook his head. Even now, he remained stymied. To be so harshly punished, he suspected there had been more afoot than he had been privy to. No matter. Here I am. But where was here? As the dust settled to a haze, he reached a free hand to the secret pouch sewn into his breeches. He removed the way-glass, an item he had pilfered from an overseer of another crew, and quickly hidden away. The loss was blamed on the other prisoners, who each lost a finger, and still someone confessed to stop the torture and claimed he got scared and threw it down a privy shaft. No one bothered to search the filth. Rafe lifted the way-glass to the flicker of the flame. The silver of the lodestone shivered back and forth. It refused to settle. Strange. He had stolen it in the vague hope that one day, making his escape, though truth be told he had noted the opportunity to nab it and could not resist. After he had been buried down here for nearly 2 years, the thought of freedom was always on his mind, and a way-glass could prove useful. He figured if ever he had the opportunity to escape the overseer's eye and take flight through some deserted section of mine, such a tool might point him in the right direction. Like now. He turned in a circle. He had come to a stop at a crossroad of tunnels. He tried to fathom the best path. He dreamed of his freedom, but he also valued his own hide. If it meant living, he would happily return to the whip and the cudgel. Death was an escape he would rather avoid. He decided on one tunnel, choosing it only because the lodestone shivered a little less in that direction. Good enough. After several hundred paces, Rafe was thoroughly lost. By now he sensed he was going in circles, slowly traversing downwards, as if marching into his own grave. As to the way-glass, it only confounded him. The lodestone now spun round and round the glass, as baffled as him. Maybe this place is accursed. He turned another tunnel, growing frantic. His heart pounded in his throat. He had at best a half day of lamp oil left. His ears strained for any telltale sign of the mine proper. Shouted orders, the ring of hammers, the cries of the whipped, but all he heard was his panted breath and the occasional mumbled curses. He had to duck his head from the low roof, which itself was a disconcerting. Like all Golgolians, he was bow-legged and hard-headed in all manners of the term. It was as if the sun had beaten all of them into squat shapes, maybe all the better to work the thousands of mines that spread breadth of the territory's coast, from the stone forest of Dodwood to the north, to the endless southern wastes. He ran a hand along the wall. feeling the cracks in the chalk. Here the timbered supports had long turned to stone, hardened by the centuries and the mineral-rich air. As he continued, those fissures widened and grew in number. He craned his neck, noting the fractures along the roof. Distracted, he tripped over a pile of loose stone and fell. He came close to smashing his way glass, but caught himself with his other hand. His lantern swung wildly from his waist belt. He held his breath, fearing the flame would snuff out. It flickered wildly, but held true. He checked the stones on the floor. Their edges were too sharp. A gap in the roof suggested they had recently broken from up there. If he had any doubt about circling towards his doom, he had proof in his hand. "Gods be," he muttered. "I'm straight back under this section that caved in." He shook his head, pushed up, and dusted himself off. He glanced down to the way glass. The lodestone had stopped spinning round now and pointed down the tunnel. He sighed and placed his hopes that it meant something. So be it. He headed along the narrowing passageway, only to discover, in another 100 steps, that the tunnel had shattered into a slide of broken rocks and sand that cut even deeper. He checked his way glass. The lodestone still pointed straight ahead, down the precarious ramp of scree and sharp boulders. His fingers gripped the way glass with frustration. "My arse if I'm traipsing down there." Exasperated, more than scared, he swung angrily away. As he did so, the feeble flame at his hip blew out. Darkness collapsed on him. No, no, no! The blackness drove him to his knees, then to his palms. He gasped and quaked. He squeezed his eyes closed, then opened again, struggling to see, refusing to accept his fate. "Not like this," he mumbled. He rolled onto his backside and hugged his knees. Though godless, he prayed to the entire pantheon, to the mother below, the father above, to the silvery sun and the dark daughter, to the shrouded Modron and the bright bell, to the giant Pyul who held up the skies, and the lowly Nethin who hid deep in the earth. He continued, leaving no one out, begging everyone in the litany. He stuttered this way across every prayer taught to him on his mum's knee. Then, as if someone heard him, a faint glow rose ahead. He rubbed a knuckle against the straining eyes. At first, he thought it was a figment dredged up by his fear, but it did not go away. Maybe it had always been there. He shifted to his knees and crawled forward. As he reached the edge of the chasm, his hands knocked loose a rock and sent it tumbling down the slope. The shine, a faint pearlescent blue, rose from the bottom. He did not know what created the glow. All that mattered was that it was a haven from the darkness, a bright port in a dark storm. With a jangle of his ankle chains, he swung his legs forward into the chasm, gritted his teeth, and set off down the steep slope. The way was treacherous, the descent precarious. Still, anything is better than this infernal darkness. And that is the end of Chapter 4. Thank you for
amazing day.